The first thing when I ask the same question is they say there's complexity, there's palate weight, there's length. Something else that we realize is that old vine wines not necessarily always show the varietal characteristics, but it actually shows sight.
Hi, Andre. It's so lovely to meet you here on Zoom.
Good morning, Petra. Thanks very much for the opportunity. Nice to see you.
Yeah, lovely to see you. And I know you are based in Stellenbosch, and from there you do the Old Vine project. So this fascinates me very much, this project that you're doing.
Yes, it's a very interesting project. I've been doing this for I think 5.5 years now. Ran it from scratch. Basically, how it started was, 20 years ago, Rosa Kruger, who's a prominent viticulturist in South Africa, became interested in old vine wines, and she traveled the world to try and understand why old vine wines are different than any other wines or from younger vines. She came back to South Africa and she started looking for old vines. And as I said, 20 years ago, she started. And then she, in 2016, approached me while I was at Wines of South Africa and asked if I would run an old vine project for her. She received seed funding from Mr. Rupert. And I said, yes. I mean, I've been with Rosa for 17 years. It was time to maybe do something different. And it is, as you say, a fascinating situation because it is about keeping old vines in the ground and trying to understand why they make such interesting, special wines. It's about the environment, and we do quite a bit of research on trying to figure out why those vines have survived for decades, 60, 80, 100 years in one place. And given our situation with climate change, we need to understand where to plant to grow old, something that I coined a couple of years ago, because we quickly understood that the mandate to keep old vines in the ground was not, the sole purpose. There's more to it. There's the human factor. There's a humanitarian element built into this effort, because as the vines grow older, they produce less grapes, which makes it economically less viable for the farmer. So if we could find a model where the farmer could also benefit from, and which we have done at this point, then the farmer is protected. The farm workers are staying in their jobs, and the brand owners, due to the fact that it's such special grapes, make these beautiful wines, and they can command higher prices. So economically, it also turned out that, if you look at the price points for grapes delivered to a cooperative is 2,000-3,000 rand a ton. And what we've managed to negotiate, I would say, is a business model between the grape grower and the brand owner, where they get more money for their grapes and the vines stay in the ground, and the brand owner can charge more. So everybody benefits with rising prices for grapes and for wines, and it makes it a more sustainable model for the industry as a whole.
Now, how are the farmers open to this idea? Because as I heard that, it is it's about the amount of grapes that come from these old vines, that it's not viable for them. So how do they receive this message?
It was very difficult in the beginning, and especially with the cooperatives that are very strict with the bottom line and the business side of things. Because when a vineyard starts being economically unviable, then they just say, pull it out, replace it. And it's usually a sort of a 20, 25-year cycle. But it's quite expensive to replace a vineyard. And if you can find a way to keep the vineyard in the ground for longer, and coupled with this model of the financing, where the price as the yield goes down, the price goes up. That's what the model was that we tried to achieve. The co-ops weren't very excited at the beginning. But you see, 85% of our old vines is within those systems. But I'm excited to tell you that we've now got, I think, 6 members of our 130 members are cooperatives. So there's a lot of grapes, old vines that can be accessed, and I think they see the value of being part of the Old Vine Project because they elevate their presence in the market. They also allow some of our members to buy in some of the grapes out of that system because they see the value for the grape, the owner, the farm owner. But we started off with 8 members in 2017. And as I mentioned, now we're on 130 odd now, 5.5 years later. Mm. So there's definitely, that maybe answers your question, that there's definitely a buy-in to the concept of protecting old vines for various reasons. As I mentioned, it's not only economics, there's research involved, which underlines what we're trying to achieve. But it's about raising the image of not only the brand owners, but South Africa and the South African wine industry as well.
Mm. And now, is there a taste difference? I mean, can you say that it's that you can sell it on the basis of it tastes differently?
There's definitely a taste difference. This is what Rosa, what piqued her interest was when she traveled and she tasted old wines from all over the world, is that the wines are different. And when I got involved and I started talking to winemakers, the first thing when I asked the same question is they say there's complexity, there's palate weight, there's length. Something else that we realize is that old wines not necessarily always show the varietal characteristics, but it actually shows sight. Last week we had a technical tasting led by a professor from the Loire, Etienne Yetling. He's a South African, but he's based out there, and he came out, he's doing research on regionality of old vine Chenin between 3 different regions, and we were about 15 mostly winemakers around the table, 3 prominent Loire wines in the lineup, and the rest South African. And there were a few wines, and for example, the Skurfberg wine from Ibn Saudi just stood out. You pin it and you can taste that is Skurfberg. So that is something that we find interesting. We'd like to figure out why, apart from the fact that why they survived so long, why do they taste different, and why do they express where they come from.
Now, do these old vines also carry illnesses? Could this be the reason that some of them get removed?
Yeah, that's a good question. In the 70s and 80s, we received quite bad plant material from overseas, and a lot of we struggle with leaf roll virus in South Africa. It's not unique to South Africa, but it's particularly bad here, especially amongst our red grapes. So that's why we have more white varieties within the old vine portfolio. Chenin Blanc being the most. Half of our old vine plantings is Chenin, and they're pretty virus resistant and heat resistant. I mean, which also is an interesting thing given climate change. We're looking at importing Mediterranean varieties like Assyrtiko and Macabeo and so forth. But we're sitting with old vine Chenins in semi-arid areas that's been surviving for 60, 80 or 100 years. Wow. But yes, there is a problem, a challenge with virus, but Rosa started harvesting along with Vititech, which is an industry institution in South Africa that deals with viticulture and propagation of material and cleaning up material. And she started harvesting cuttings from our oldest vineyards, range across the varietal range, and they've been busy cleaning them up, and soon in the next couple of years we'll be able to release that material to our members for interplanting or actually establishing new blocks.
Okay.
And so that's a very important element that we're busy with, is the cleaning up of these old blocks. And then we also work with the French nursery Octave. They were here 2-3 years ago. They came and fetched DNA from our 10 oldest Chenin baby, cleaned it up. We cleaned it up over here, took it to France, cleaned it there, looked at the DNA, and that material is going to go to their clonal garden and also be available for us to use again. So that we have typical South African Chenin clones. What we have arrived in the 1650s for Jan van Riebeeck to plant is the clones are not, they're different. And the French want to understand why it changed. And we also want to understand that. And so the next project we're going to work on is a clonal research project with University of Stellenbosch and the French to understand what clones we have here, because that's something we can't do at the moment. You can't take DNA from a plant and actually say this is clone number so-and-so. And this will be groundbreaking work.
But now, how do you date these vines? Do you have records of, if a farmer, for example, have these old vines, how do they prove that they are actually old?
South Africa and our industry has got an industry body called SARVIS. They look after statistics and records. There's nothing else like it in the world. And it is because of SARVIS that the Old Vine project can actually exist. Rosa went to them and to the CEO, Yvette van der Merwe, many years ago, long before the Old Vine project started, to get access to the planting records. Our records date back to 1900. So we can actually trace the planting date. There's a lot of Old Vine groupings, voluntary groupings across the world. There's you will see Le Vin on a French label, or Alten Reben in Germany, that says Old Vine, but there's no traceability. They can't tell you if it could be 26 or 60 years old or 150 years old. But the grandfather planted it, it's in a diary or on the chalkboard somewhere. Here in South Africa, we can actually, through an industry organization, prove that the vineyard was planted on that date. And that gives us the possibility of a certification seal.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's lovely.
So we've registered certified heritage vineyards. And as you can see, there's a plant date.
Yeah.
That's
amazing.
So the seal is also first in the world. And again, coupled with traceability, it gives the consumer the guarantee of authenticity, a level of exclusivity, because it's so limited, and that what the story is real behind the wine. That's another thing that's so exciting about old vine wines. There's always a story behind the block. Who planted it, or what happened there, or how it got there. So that brings more complexity to the whole narrative.
And I think for collectors as well, that must be very interesting if you start collecting these wines from the old wines, and you have these different stories then connected to it. Yeah,
exactly. But the thing with the old vines, especially with the seal, it's so limited and exclusive. There's only so many cases made per old vine wine. So it's very desirable to have, an old vine wine on the dining room table.
And I've also been speaking to winemakers who talk about the organic, the going very organic, and also with the soil, the way they treat the soil. And I'm thinking now and we've also learned in the last years more about the microbiomes and how that affects everything. So is this also something that the old vines have, that they, because they're so long in this, for such a long time in this specific soil, that the microorganisms are different in the root systems, for example?
Yeah, I would say that it's very important to keep soil healthy. That's some of the first things that I think that you need to look at when you try to save an old vine. Often these old vineyards are really neglected and not being pruned for years and just left alone, and the cattle feed on the leaves and the grapes, or the sheep, and the farmer just doesn't bother with it. It's too expensive to carry on with it because there's no yield, or they just harvest a couple of crates with it and then it goes into a blend. So when you revive an old vine, what's very important is soil health, so mulching and some compost, and then pruning. Pruning is very, very important. Rosa always tells me she would find an old block that gives you less than 2 tons a hectare. She revived the oldest red block in South Africa, which is a Cinso, from basically, I think, 500 kilograms per ton, and it's up to 5.5 after a green harvest. Beautiful Cinso that she revived. So that the pruning is essential, and alongside with what we do as the Old Vine Project, we do old vine pruning classes to the vineyard work. So we coupled with Falco, which is the Swiss shearer manufacturer, and they sponsor our pruning classes. So our members have the possibility of sending their senior pruners that actually look after the old vines, and we do about 4 or 5 pruning classes per year just before pruning starts in winter. And it is amazing to see the results of how excited people become when they understand why are they pruning. We do a theory class where Falco talks about looking after your shearers, the importance of maintenance. We've got one of Rosa's proteges, Sheldon. He talks through the process of pruning, what to do and what not to do, and why you do what you do. And then I talk about the value of great wines to sell overseas, that if you don't prune correctly, you don't get great grapes to make great wines to keep the whole business, the whole value chain intact. So that's quite satisfying. And then coupled with that, during lockdown, we couldn't do the classes because of COVID. And a former colleague of mine, Petra Meyer in Germany, had this idea to give back to the industry because everybody was suffering, without work, and especially in the tourism industry, and try and not be able to sell wine. And she sat down with a few German importers, and they got this idea to create a wine from which the proceeds will come back to South Africa to help the people.
Wonderful.
And so the one beneficiary is the Cape Winemakers Guild Protege program, which is something, it's a project that Louis Stradom started years ago. What they do is they bring young winemakers with potential, and they push them into the industry after their studies, and they work under some of the best winemakers for a vintage or two to learn and fast track into the industry. And the other part of the funds comes to the Old Vine Project, and with that we train more people. We've got a Old Vine Academy that my colleague Nadia is developing, which would be an online training course of on what is the value of old wines, how to sell the wine that was developed, which is called Inviniewetu. And that one is also certified old wine. Wine, it's a Senso Pinotage blend, and that's being sold mainly in Europe. And that training course, then you can get a certificate when you've completed it.
Amazing.
So, but then again, with COVID, we couldn't train.
Oh,
And
okay.
Nadi came up with the idea of the academy, so she started writing the back end of that. And then Rosa said, but we have to give people something. Petra actually said, why don't you do soup kitchens or just feed people? It's winter, it's cold. And we spent a lot of time thinking about what will be the most sustainable contribution. And we thought, okay, food, you feed one person, you won't feed a family. And then it's not sustainable. So Rosa said, why don't we give them gumboots? It's such a simple thing, but people really suffer when they don't have a jersey or proper shoes to work in the cold conditions in winter, with pruning especially. So we bought gumboots, labeled Certified Heritage Vineyards through the Inviniewetu money. And we delivered last year to almost half of our members. This year, every person who will come to a training class with Falco will get an Inviniewetu pair of boots as well.
That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah.
Because,
so
yeah.
It's not only about the old vines. It's about the people and how we can contribute to the future of our people, and also environmental research. As I said, given what's happening in South Africa. Marissa tells me that with what she reads and research, that our temperatures will go up anything from 1 to 5 degrees in the next 20, 30 years. That makes a big difference to growing conditions in agriculture.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's all, we're talking about environmental issues and so on, but also we have to remember the people. And it's like you say, when you care for the people and care how they work and how their working conditions are, then you also get more from them, because they're capable of giving more. I think this is wonderful. Wonderful project. Yeah.
Yeah, it's important for people to understand why they do what they do, and to see the results. I show them a few pictures of where the wines end up, and at what price points, so that channels back to vineyard level.
And also then when somebody buys this bottle of wine, they know what the Old Vine Project stands for, that it's much more than just producing wine. I think this is great. Yeah.
It's the consumer has changed over the last few decades, especially the tourist, the wine tourist. They don't want to just come and taste and drink wine and enjoy the restaurant. They want to be part of an experience. They want to contribute to the community. They want to see that there's something behind the label, that people benefit from their contribution, from their intervention, and visiting the Cape Winelands or any vineyards in the world. They're concerned about their health. They look at the alcohol levels. They want to learn something. There must be an educational element to it. And with old vine wines, there's a lot of content, that's intrinsic to the story and the narrative. I don't know if you know as an example, I went to see Francois Rautenbach, who runs the wine program for Sigita. They've got about 17 lodges, I think, across Southern Africa. And the first one started in the Kruger. And he told me a story that really sort of is a good example of what I'm trying to explain, of how people value to be part of a story. They had a couple on a game drive from New York, showed them the anti-rhino poaching unit, which is a Land Rover and staff and some dogs. And they were quite intrigued. And they, what Sigita does is when you're a second or third visitor, you get the discount, or you get a very nice bottle of wine. And visitors in the last 2 decades, he says, just sit down, give the money to the community. Tell us where the money goes. We want to contribute to the community rather than just have a wine. We can afford the wine. Take the discount and give it to the staff.
Yeah.
So this couple went back to New York, and they had a couple of South African wines over dinner with friends, and they sent an email back to Sigita offering, and said they would like to sponsor another anti-rhino poaching unit.
Amazing.
That's fantastic. Mm-hmm. So this is the kind of thing that when people know that they are buying something like an old wine, they're contributing to who is actually behind the wine, whether it's the farm owner or the worker. And that's why we've got projects like in Vini Wetu. We've got the partnership with Falco. I think that's very significant. It's not just a bottle of wine.
That's totally what I think is important, and that it's not just about any prestige, and it's really about consciously buying, and thinking about people and about the environment. I think it's amazing, and that label stands exactly for that.
Yeah. Now I think it all started with just to realize what the value is of old vines.
Yeah.
And what you can get from that in terms of research and the sustainability of our industry. As I said, we want to learn from the old vines, the wisdom of the old vines. Why are they there? Yeah. Why did they survive? For future, to plant to grow old.
Mm-hmm. And, I think sometimes it's, look, I'm talking from the clouds here, but I sometimes think some things are just, have to be valued for not necessarily for the money. And I can understand if the farmer needs to think about how much money he needs to earn, but then if it becomes then also a different cycle if you start thinking, okay, I do have less grapes, but I can earn a bit more. And then in turn, it makes a cycle to help the environment, to help the people around me, and to stand for something. It's not just about this change of money all the time. It's just that there's a bigger project or a bigger concept around it. I think this is wonderful.
Yeah, one of my favorite stories is one of my first visits to Skurfberg, where we think everything started when Rosa discovered those vineyards through a viticulturist. One of the growers there, Henk Lang, and he passed away last year, but we had lunch with him, and he said they were busy pulling up the vineyards because he couldn't afford to not make money and to sustain the farm and put the kids through school. And since Rosa arrived, she started selling off the grapes to several winemakers, and they pushed up the price point, as I explained earlier. 2,000-3,000 rand to the co-op. Now he's getting 8, 12, 15, 20,000. And through that, you can buy a new tractor. You can put solar panels on your workers' homes, or you can use it for education for your kids. And that actually happened. He put three children through University of Stellenbosch with old vine money. So it's not a silver bullet, but it helps, to stop some gaps.
No, that's wonderful. I think I really support this work you're doing. I think this is really great, and it's a different way also of looking at agriculture and winemaking and environmental issues as well. But now, Andre, tell me, what is your wish for the future for this project?
I get asked this quite often because we are in a different, the first few years were very difficult. We didn't really know where we were going. We were in the dark. There was no handbook. There was no guide. Nothing. It hasn't been done before in the world. When Wines of Africa invited me to speak at ProVine, I had the opportunity to visit my so-called counterparts, and I walked from country to country over 2 days. And I spoke to the guys in Barossa and Argentina, Chile, Portugal, Spain, and Napa, Lodi. But they are all informal and voluntary groupings. It hasn't been formalized like what we've done. So, but they're all very supportive, of course. And we also established that, a vineyard is old when it's 35 years and older, which was very important for me to get that consensus. We have a conversation with the OIV at the moment. There's a working group to set these standards. But what I would like to see is that the seal becomes more and more important. And what we see is that from the trade side, there's a pull. So there's importers and sommeliers that actually say, if you say, or you claim that you've got an old vine wine, are you a member of the Old Vine Project? And secondly, do you have the seal in your bottle? And that is very important. Otherwise, they don't import buy the wine. And that means we are significant in actually, we've now created a category. So it's like you walk into a wine shop or open a wine list and there's white wine, red wine, fair trade, or whatever, Cabernet, Sauvignon Blanc, Chenin Blanc. There is now old vine categories in wine lists here in South Africa, in wine shops. I was at a launch of at a restaurant earlier this week where the Stellenbosch Wine Emporium was opened at a restaurant called the Varietal, and there is a old vine section.
Wow.
And that wasn't like a few years ago, nobody even thought about it. So I want to see that category expand, that it becomes more valuable for the brand owners, that there's more value that goes back to the farmer and the workers. I also want to see the research develop. The first research project on old vine Chenin was done by the University of Stellenbosch along with the Chenin Blanc Association on aroma. Why are old vine wines aroma profile different from young Chenin wine? So that research has been concluded, and it's obvious that there are different descriptors for old vine Chenins. And I just want to say that we don't say old vines make better or the best wines.
Yeah.
The wines are just different and intellectually challenging and interesting. It's just a different category. I mean, there are fantastic wines made from vineyards that are even 3 years old. I chatted with David Trafford the other day, who also is a proponent of old vine Chenin long before we even thought about old vine on the label. And he talks about a French wine that was almost 100 points, and from 3 or 4 year old vineyards. Pruera, also an old vine proponent, makes some of the best Chenins from vines that are less than 10 years old. So it's not about being the better or the best, but it's so the research gives us an idea, as I said, why those vines have survived. Then what is interesting is that Professor Johan Berger at the University of Stellenbosch did research on the DNA and why the juice is different. So he took from one block DNA samples of young vines and older vines, and he found that the juice is different. That is something that's very significant, that old vine juice, when it comes to the cellar, is almost basically perfect. The pH,
Really?
acidity, the sugar, and that is something we need to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And often old vine grapes hang longer on the vine before harvesting, 2-3 weeks difference from the younger vines. And then technically the sugar should be higher, but it's lower. So a lot of winemakers will tell you, all you need to do is just put it in a concrete vessel or an egg or an old barrel and leave it, and it does its own thing.
Yeah, but
So
yeah.
We want to understand so that kind of research is important. Then obviously, from an economic point of view, what Jonathan Stein is doing at UCT Business School, he's busy with the project or research project, but the significance of old wine on your label and if in the consumer perception. So far, they've established that the consumer is willing to pay an average of 300 Rand a bottle for an old wine. And the current research is on the seal, and see if the seal is making a difference and that people are willing to pay more. So it comes back to the economic model for everybody, that the price points are being pushed up.
Well, now that you mentioned about the sugar content in the grapes, also that will affect the fermentation process probably, and how the wine is going to be made, or how the wine is made.
Yeah, definitely. And that's, as I would say, minimum intervention is key, because as I said, the analysis of the juice is basically perfect. And also, a mistake that some winemakers make is that they use new oak. The idea is to not try and influence the flavor profile, because it's so beautiful and developed and concentrated and complex already, that you shroud with and also commercial yeast. It's preferable that it should be fermented with wild yeast, but that's not always possible. That's a difficult one.
Yeah.
It's a contentious issue.
Okay.
But so what I'm saying is minimum intervention to respect the integrity of the juice.
Wow, this is so interesting. I'm also, I don't know much about winemaking, but I'm very interested in the fermentation process, and that's very interesting. And I think it's great that there's now so much research being done, because that proves that there are something to talk about and something to learn. So that's great. Yeah.
And now what we also achieved now in the recent couple of weeks is we managed to secure funding through WineTech here in South Africa to do research on clones, because at the moment you can't go to a vine and tell what clone it is. So the research will now be done by Professor Jan Berger again. And the benefit of that is that you can then, if a wine farmer, a grower wants to plant Chenin, that they use the correct clone for that region. So the West Coast clones up in Skirfbergenstaan will not really work possibly in Stellenbosch.
Oh, I see, yeah.
So you need to keep it regional. So that will be a scientific decision on which clones to use in which region. And but also for us to learn what we have here.
Yeah, but will it also be then when the farmer decides, it will have to be a decision, I'm going to develop this block as an old vine block. And so in 35 years' time, this will be then these grapes, so that they, from the start, nurture them so that they get into that category of being old vines.
That's our plant to grow old philosophy.
Okay.
If you marry a soil type or a site with the correct rootstock and the correct variety or clone, you will be able to nurture that block into maturity, and they can graduate to 35 years and grow older. And we break the cycle of having it pulled out all the time. And we have cleaner material now, so that also helps.
Yeah.
Clean up, actually. Just not cleaner, clean up.
Virus-free material. What a wonderful gift this can be from a father to a son on a wine farm, to say, exactly. I've nurtured this for you for to be part of this old vine group.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that would be a great idea.
Yeah.
But listen, Andre, this was so lovely to talk to you now. But I just have now one a question for you. While you're drinking wine, what are you drinking, by the way?
It's a Chenin Blanc.
Oh, okay. Is it an old vine?
Yeah.
Oh, of course, yeah. silly question, but but tell me, can you do a shout out for a restaurant or a bar in your area in Stellenbosch?
There's quite a lot now. I mean, we always had maybe one wine bar in Stellenbosch, and currently I think there are almost 6 or 8 that opened
Really?
during and post-COVID, which is amazing. But I work from home, and it becomes a bit lonely at some point of the day. So I often go to the Watermark, which I mentioned, where the wine emporium opened, and where we have our old wine section now. And I'll be spending more time there now because we'll, do tastings there. So I love going there and working there. My favorite restaurant for sushi is Genki.
Oh yeah.
And then around the corner from the Watermark is the Fat Butcher. They're the first restaurant to put our logo, which is the little one over there on top.
Oh yeah.
So you see that little logo next to our members. There's a bit of description of Heritage Vineyards, and then our logo is next to them. The Watermark did the same. And there's 2 new restaurants that I quite like, which is French inspired, is La Siema and Rijkaard's.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we actually did a Cinsault tasting, old wine Cinsault tasting with Tim Atkin at Rijkaard's the other day. There's Volkskom base that was renovated a couple of years ago, which is a beautiful, beautiful space. And then, of course, the old traditional Decameron.
Oh yeah, I know that one.
And then there's, Bertus Basson's places are really fantastic. Anything from Spek and Boone, which is a more tapa style restaurant, to the Acre, which is, quite upmarket, and Overture, which is on the wine farm. Then there's 96 Winery Road, which was the first winery restaurant that Ken Forrester started, which is a favorite. And then Christoph de Haas runs the kitchens at Justenburg and Glen Elly, which I really like.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I heard of that.
But there's many more.
I mean, Stellenbosch is like a treasure trove of restaurants, and definitely.
Yeah.
And coffee shops.
Yeah.
And now wine bars as well.
Yes.
Yeah. But Andre, it was so lovely to meet you here on Zoom, and I hope to meet you one day in person in Stellenbosch. I'm coming to look you up, when I'm there. Please
do that.
Yeah. And have a glass of old wine with you.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you for the support.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.